Well, this is going to be my opinion on why I think the story that Pat Garrett told about the night that Billy the Kid was killed is actually what happened. So, Billy the Kid, of course, escaped from jail in Lincoln, New Mexico in April of 1881. And he eluded capture for a while. And, Pat Garrett kept hearing rumors that Billy the Kid was up in the Fort Sumner area, even though Pat Garrett didn't really understand why Billy the Kid would go there, being on the run and all that from the law, after killing 2 of his deputies. But the reports of him being up there were getting to be so much that Garrett could not ignore him anymore. And this story had national, it was national news. It was in the newspapers in San Francisco and New York about the kid that escaped jail, killing 2 deputies, and was still on the run. So Pat Garrett was kind of in a tough spot where he couldn't ignore all the reports coming out of Fort Sumner that Billy the Kid was in that area. So I believe reluctantly, but he went up there to go see if he could find him, at least try to make a good faith effort. And he had a deputy named McKinney and Poe with him. And anyway, they kind of tried to get, Pat Garrett knew that Billy the Kid was a popular person, especially in Fort Sumner. And Pat Garrett knew the residents of Fort Sumner was not going to give him up, let him know, not give him any information. So they got to Fort Sumner, and they kind of hid in some tree in the orchard on one side of town and was trying to observe, hopefully seeing if they stayed there long enough that they could see Billy the Kid go in or out of somewhere. And anyway, late that night, they hid in that orchard for a long time, trying to see if they could spot Billy the Kid, and they didn't. So Pat Garrett got the idea of going and asking Pete Maxwell if he had seen Billy the Kid. And this is late at night. I think it was somewhere between 11 and 12 at night. So they go up to Pete Maxwell's house, and Poe and McKinney stay outside, and Pat Garrett said, I'm going to go in here and ask Pete. And he disappears into Pete Maxwell's bedroom, which is on the corner of the house. And just as Pat Garrett disappears into the house, Poe notices a man coming along the fence. He said he didn't have a hat on, he didn't have shoes on, he just had socks on, and it looked like he was fastening up his pants. But this man was coming towards him, and it was Billy the Kid. And as he got right up on Poe, Billy didn't see him at first, and they got almost face to face. They still within arm's reach of each other when Billy realized he was sitting there, and it startled him, and he jumped up on the porch and held his gun to cover Poe and started backing up towards Pete Maxwell's bedroom and asking "Quién es, who is there?" in Spanish. And Poe even engaged and said, "Hey, we're not going to hurt you. Calm down," something along those lines. Okay, I got to add this to the video. It's important that you know that Poe and McKinney had never been to Fort Sumner, New Mexico, and did not know Billy the Kid by sight. So that's important to this story. Pat Garrett knew everybody in Fort Sumner, was familiar to everybody, and knew Billy the Kid really well. So, but it's important to the story that Poe and McKinney did not. Okay? Just want to throw that in there real quick before I continue. So Billy the Kid backs into the room, and he says "Quién es?" and he asks Pete, "Hey, who is out there?" Well, Pat Garrett had just walked in the room. He'd been in there less than a minute, and he had woken Pete Maxwell up in his sleep. And Pete Maxwell was a little agitated being woken up, and Pat was asking if he'd seen the kid, and he said, "No, he's not in Fort Sumner, but he's close." And just as that had been said, Billy the Kid starts backing into the room, asking, "Who is this?" And Pete Maxwell heard Billy ask, who's on the porch outside? And he sits up real quick and tells Garrett that's him. And for a split second, Billy the Kid realized something was going on and took like a cat. I think Pat Garrettt described it as a cat-like movement backwards. And Pat Garrettt drew his weapon and fired into the dark at the figure that had just entered the room. And, started kind of running towards the door and fired another shot on the way out. And then Pete Maxwell runs out after Pat Garrettt, and he gets all tangled up in his bedclothes and all this stuff. And Poe, who is on the porch still, hearing gunshots as Pat Garrettt runs out, and then Pete Maxwell running out behind him. Poe draws his gun on Pete Maxwell and almost shoots Pete Maxwell. And Pat Garrettt slaps his gun down and said, You're about to shoot Pete. Don't shoot Pete. And he says, that was the kid that just walked in the room, and I think I got him. And they all got up against the wall, not knowing whether the person that just got shot in the room was still alive or not, didn't know anything about it. He shot into the dark. And Poe said, he's not, we know the kid's not here. We haven't been able to find him. He's not here. You shot the wrong man. And so, understandably so, if you think you just shot Billy the Kid and you don't know if you killed him, then you're going to be hesitant to walk back up to that door. And that's exactly what happened. They all sat there for a while trying to hear movement and figure out what's going on. And Pete Maxwell wound up getting a candle and going to the window sill. And Pat Garrettt kind of got at an angle where he could be as safe as he could be and was able to look in and see the body. And once they saw that the person in was dead, they all went in and saw that it was, in fact, Billy the Kid that he had just shot, just above the heart. Now, this is what I think makes this story believable, because if you're going to make up a story about killing the most dangerous outlaw in the West, does the story you come up with is that you got lucky, shot at someone unknown in the dark, and wound up killing Billy the Kid? Now, Pat Garrettt claimed he recognized the voice. Pete recognized the voice. But they said even afterwards, some of the reports, that Pat Garrettt was a little still unsure of himself, whether he killed the kid or not. He thought he killed the kid. He wasn't 100% sure until they got back into the room. But my point is, if you're going to make a story up, if it's going to be a false story, if you let Billy the Kid go to go live a long life as somebody else, don't you come up with a better story than somebody backing into the room in the dark and Billy the Kid just walking up on you by just sheer chance? I just think if you're going to make a story up, it's a better story than that. It's a more fanciful story. I just think you add a little bit more to it if you're going to make something up. And, you're not going to probably put the part on you being, they were scared to approach the room afterwards. I mean, if you think about it, realistically, if you think you just shot Billy the Kid and don't know that you killed him, that would be your reaction, is to be scared to walk back up to that room. And so I don't think you make that part up if you're making the story up. I shot Billy the Kid. It was him. I know it was him. Heard his voice. I shot him. He fell. So I just feel like the story, if made up, would be a better story. So anyway, that's one thing. Another thing is Pete Maxwell and Poe both said they thought they heard 3 shots. Pat Garrettt only fired 2 shots. And, when they got in there and found out it was Billy the Kid, that he did have a spent casing in the hammer barrel. Like, it was turned to that barrel, and there was an empty empty bullet casing in that chamber. So, but it didn't look like it had been recently fired, was what they said. And apparently, it was kind of a thing of the time, almost as like a safety, to have an empty chamber at where the hammer is, almost to act as a safety. That was common back in that time. And they did a very thorough search of the room One bullet was in Billy's body above his heart, and the second bullet had ricocheted on the other side of the room and went into Pete Maxwell's headboard. So they kind of come to the conclusion that the ricochet is what they thought was the third shot. The fact that there's a discrepancy, there's only 4 people that was witness to this, kind of. You know, they were all right there in the vicinity. The fact that there's a discrepancy between 2 and 3 shots, to me, kind of lends some credibility to it, because if they were going to make the story up, the story would be the same. There wouldn't be a discrepancy. As a matter of fact, if you're going to make the story up, if you make it up, I think your story is, especially with the 3-shot scenario, is that Billy the Kid shot back. That they were in a shootout, that Pat Garretts won. Wouldn't that be the better story if you're going to tell a story and make a story up? If you're going to trying to be this famous lawman that you got in a gunfight, a back and forth gunfight with Billy the Kid and won. So I think that the fact that there's a discrepancy kind of adds some credibility to the story a little bit to me. Because if they were all on the same page and all in it together, then there wouldn't be any discrepancies. They would all have the same story. And it wouldn't be no confusion, the fog of war. So, hey, another thing that I didn't add in there is, and this is important to the story too, after Pat Garretts shot and killed Billy the Kid, people started waking up and coming to figure out, coming over there to Pete Maxwell's house to find out what happened. And once they found out that Pat Garretts had shot and killed Billy the Kid, the town was in an uproar. I mean, they were, and I think at one point that Pat Garretts and his small crew thought that they were going to be lynched by the mob that was upset for Billy the Kid being killed because he was such a popular figure. And that's important, because if you're going to make a story up, you're not going to make that one up with that crowd. I mean, if you accidentally killed Billy Barlow, and then the crowd comes up and is mad because you shot and killed Billy the Kid, it would be very easy to say, look, hey, wasn't him, wasn't the kid. And it would probably would have upset whoever Billy Barlow was close to, but obviously Billy Barlow wasn't missed if he's the one who passed away that night. Wasn't enough people in an uproar if it was him. So anyway, I just think that's another part that's pertinent to this story, is that the crowd was turned into a mob afterwards, and Pat Garretts was actually scared of the outcome. So again, if you're going to make the story up, just don't think that's the one you make up. Especially that you shot violently into the dark. And if you could make the argument that you shot Billy the Kid back, he was shooting at you, again, it's just a better story for the mob. I mean, it'd be easier to make that up, especially on the spot. Anyway, just wanted to add that. It is important to the story, that the way the town felt about Billy the Kid, and the fact that you could not have hidden his body. They had to take his body out of Pete Maxwell's house. It wasn't like today where, they got an ambulance and a tent set up and you can't get close enough because it's all taped off. These are 3 guys back in the 1800s. There was no way for them to keep the public from viewing Billy the Kid's body. So the fact that they were trying to claim that, he was rushed over and buried quickly, and he was buried the next day, but his body was prepared by the women there. And like I said, there was no way the public was not going to see what happened at that house that night. Just not the way it would have worked. But anyway, thought that was important to the story. For those reasons, I believe the story that Pat Garretts told. I don't think Poe was a fan of Pat Garretts. I don't think Poe thought that Pat Garretts really wanted to get to Billy the Kid. I don't think it was because they were friends. I think it was Pat Garretts was scared of Billy the Kid. He knew he was a good shot. He was quick to shoot people if he had to, if he was cornered. And I think he just didn't want to go after the guy. He needed the money. That was a big part of Pat Garrett's thing. He got the $500, which he needed at the time, but he didn't. He wasn't so broke that he wanted to die in search of this outlaw. So anyway, all this I could be completely wrong. Obviously, I'm just somebody who pays attention to some of this stuff. I'm not a historian. I'm just a guy that absorbs a lot of this material and reads a lot about it, and have my own opinion on it, of course. And I know there's people that disagree with me angrily, probably. But I think that the story could be that the same story happened, but he shot Billy Barlow, is what Brushy Bill Roberts claimed, is that they passed Billy Barlow off as Billy the Kid and buried the wrong man. But Brushy Bill Roberts claims that the night that Pat Garrett shot Billy Barlow, he also shot him in the face. And that he woke up the next day and Pat Garrett had already passed Billy Barlow's body off as Billy the Kid. Well, if there was a gunfight between Billy Barlow and Pat Garrett and Brushy Bill Roberts and Pat Garrett, like I said, Brushy Bill Roberts claims that Pat Garrett shot him that night in the face. Now, that's a fancy story. If you're gonna make a story up, that's a pretty good one. Instead of Billy the Kid backed in the room I was into the dark, and I shot blindly into the dark and happened to hit him just above his heart, killing him instantly. I just don't think that's the one you make up. I just don't. And I would think over the years that story would, stories grow over years. Pat Garrett had, 20 years? Almost 28 years, something like that, 27 years after that, before he passed. Story didn't get more fancy as time went. That, Pat Garrett could have easily claimed that Billy the Kid shot at him too. Especially with the 3-bullet thing. Anyway, just my opinion. Just want to put it out there. I think Pat Garrett was probably telling the truth. Because if he wasn't, it'd be a better story. Anyway, let me know what you think. Let's get a conversation started. Let's please keep them respectful. And let's just have a conversation about it. And let me know what you think. Appreciate it. Thanks for watching.